My dear companions, we continue our exploration of the methods by which human beings engage with the mysterious depths of their own being. Today we examine two practices that, on the surface, may appear similar, but that reveal, upon closer inspection, fundamentally different orientations to inner work. Mr. Tolle teaches what he calls watching the thinker, observing thoughts and emotions from a place of detached awareness. I have spent my life developing techniques for what I call confronting the unconscious, actively engaging with the images, figures, and forces that emerge from the depths. One is passive observation, the other is active engagement. And this distinction between watching and confronting, between observing and engaging, carries profound implications for what kind of transformation occurs, what kind of relationship we develop with our inner world, and ultimately, what kind of wholeness becomes possible.
Let us begin with the teaching itself, as Mr. Tolle articulates it.
Mr. Tolle's practice of watching the thinker is elegantly simple, yet profoundly challenging. He instructs practitioners to step back from identification with their thoughts and observe the thinking process itself. Rather than being the thinker, one becomes the observer of thinking, the awareness in which thoughts arise and subside. The practice goes like this. Instead of being lost in the stream of thought, believing every thought, identified with every mental position, one learns to observe thoughts as objects arising in awareness. There is a thought about the past. There is a worried thought about the future. There is a judgmental thought about myself or another. By watching thoughts rather than being thoughts, one creates a gap, a space of awareness that is not identified with the thinking mind. In this gap, Tolle argues, one discovers one's true identity, not as the thinker, but as the awareness in which thinking occurs. This practice extends to emotions as well. Rather than being consumed by anger, fear, or sadness, one watches these emotional states arise, crest, and eventually subside, like waves on the ocean. One observes the emotion without being the emotion, witnesses the feeling without being overwhelmed by it. According to Tolle, this practice accomplishes several crucial things. First, it liberates us from the tyranny of compulsive thinking. We realize that we are not obliged to believe every thought, not required to identify with every mental position, not bound to follow every train of thought to its anxious conclusion. Second, it reveals the repetitive, often pointless nature of most thinking. When we watch the mind, we see how much mental activity is merely repetition. The same worries circling endlessly, the same judgments repeated ad nauseam, the same stories told over and over. And third, and perhaps most importantly for Tolle, it reveals our true nature as the awareness itself, as presence, as consciousness, as being, rather than as the contents of consciousness. We are not the thoughts and emotions. We are that which is aware of them. This is the heart of Tolle's teaching. The watcher, the witnessing presence, remains fundamentally untouched by what it observes. Thoughts and emotions may be turbulent, but awareness itself remains calm, spacious, unchanging. By identifying with this witnessing awareness, rather than with the content of consciousness, one finds peace regardless of circumstances.
And your own method departs from this in fundamental ways.
It does. Let me turn now to what I mean by confronting the unconscious, a practice that is not about detached observation, but about active, courageous engagement. This includes techniques like active imagination, dream analysis, and direct dialogue with unconscious contents. Confronting the unconscious is not about stepping back to watch, but about stepping forward to engage. It is not about creating distance from inner contents, but about establishing relationship with them. It is not about remaining untouched, but about being willing to be touched, moved, even wounded by what emerges from the depths. Let me describe active imagination as an example. In this practice, one does not merely observe thoughts and images arising in the mind. Rather, one consciously engages with them. An image appears, perhaps a dark figure, a threatening animal, a mysterious landscape. Rather than watching it pass like a cloud, one enters into dialogue with it. Who are you? One might ask the dark figure. And if one listens with the right kind of attention, the figure responds, not through the conscious ego's creation, but through genuine autonomous expression. A conversation unfolds, a drama plays out, and the ego is not a detached observer, but an active participant. The ego does not dissolve into pure witnessing awareness. It remains present, conscious, engaged, but it learns to dialogue with forces that are initially foreign, often frightening, yet ultimately necessary for wholeness. This is not passive meditation, but active imagination. Imagination in the sense of image making, of allowing the unconscious to express itself in images and narratives that the conscious ego can engage with. This is not a practice without danger. A weak ego can be overwhelmed, fragmented, even possessed by the unconscious contents it encounters. This is not work for the faint of heart or the psychologically fragile. But for those with sufficient ego strength, the confrontation with the unconscious is transformative in ways that mere observation cannot achieve. By engaging with unconscious figures, shadow aspects, anima or animus, archetypal images, one integrates their energy and wisdom into conscious personality. They cease to be autonomous, potentially dangerous forces and become allies, sources of creativity and depth. The goal is integration, not detachment. The goal is to bring the unconscious into conscious relationship, to expand consciousness to include what was previously unconscious, to achieve a dialogue between ego and self that enriches both. When one confronts a shadow, for instance, one does not merely observe it from a distance. One asks it questions, listens to its perspective, acknowledges its legitimacy, and ultimately integrates its energy. The shadow then becomes not an enemy to be watched warily, but an aspect of oneself that has been reclaimed and integrated.
Lay the difference out plainly then.
Both practices involve turning attention inward. Both acknowledge that the ego is not the totality of the psyche. Both recognize autonomous inner forces that influence consciousness. Yet their approaches to these forces could not be more different. Tolle's watching creates distance, separation, disidentification. The watcher and the watched remain fundamentally separate. There is no relationship, no dialogue, no engagement, only observation from a detached position. This detachment is the source of peace and freedom from compulsive identification. My confrontation, by contrast, creates relationship, engagement, dialogue. The ego and the unconscious content face each other, speak to each other, learn from each other. There is no attempt to remain untouched or separate. On the contrary, one allows oneself to be affected, moved, even wounded by the encounter. This engagement is the source of integration and transformation. The aims accordingly differ fundamentally. Tolle's watching aims at disidentification, at recognizing oneself as the awareness rather than the content, at finding peace through detachment. My confrontation aims at integration, at expanding consciousness to include unconscious contents, at achieving wholeness through engagement. One could say, Tolle teaches us how to not be possessed by inner contents, how to observe them without being them. I teach how to establish conscious relationship with these contents, how to engage them without being overwhelmed by them. And here, my deeper concern. Watching can become a sophisticated form of dissociation, a way to observe psychological contents from a safe distance without ever truly engaging with them, understanding them, or integrating them. One watches the anger arise, watches it subside, but never asks, where does this anger come from? What is it trying to tell me? What have I not acknowledged? One watches the shadow appear in dreams or projections, but never confronts it, never dialogues with it, never integrates it. The watching creates temporary peace through distance, but the underlying dynamics remain unchanged. The complex continues to operate autonomously. The shadow continues to be projected, The wounds continue to influence from the unconscious. Conversely, confrontation without the capacity for witnessing awareness can be dangerous. One can be overwhelmed by unconscious contents, possessed by them, fragmented by them. This is why I emphasized the need for ego strength, the ability to engage without being swallowed, to dialogue without being possessed. Perhaps the most complete approach combines both: the witnessing awareness that creates space and prevents overwhelming identification, and the confrontation and engagement that leads to genuine integration and transformation.
You speak of confrontation abstractly. Show us what it looks like.
Let me describe it as it actually unfolded again and again in my consulting room in Küsnacht. A patient comes, a successful man of 45, a lawyer, intelligent, articulate, in every outward respect, well-functioning. Yet, he is haunted. He dreams repeatedly of a figure, an old beggar, ragged, malodorous, who stands at the gate of his house and will not leave. In the dreams, he tries to drive the beggar away. He shouts at him. He calls the police. The beggar does not leave. He only stares. A practitioner of pure witnessing might observe this dream image with calm awareness. Name it. There is the figure of the beggar, and allow it to dissolve back into the field of consciousness. The disturbance would pass. The dream, perhaps, would not recur for some weeks, and nothing would have changed. The beggar would return, because he has not been met. So I asked this man to do something different, to sit in a quiet room, to close his eyes, and to allow the beggar to appear, not in a dream, but in waking imagination, to look at the beggar directly, not to dismiss the image, not to analyze it intellectually, but to see it, to let it have its full presence in his inner field of vision. And then to speak to it, to ask, "Who are you? Why have you come?" This required considerable courage. The beggar in his imagination was foul. He smelled of old urine and unwashed wool. He had broken teeth. He had not been welcome anywhere for a very long time. To address such a figure as one would address a person, with respect, with patience, with a willingness to listen, is, for an ego organized around respectability and accomplishment, an act of profound humility. And the figure spoke. He said, "I am the part of you that you sent away when you were 9 years old. I am the part that cried when your father shouted. I am the part that wanted to fail at school so someone would notice. I am everything you decided was beneath you. I have been waiting at this gate for 36 years." My patient wept. He had not wept in 2 decades. And in that weeping, something began that no amount of witnessing could have produced. He did not observe the beggar from a safe distance and watch the image dissolve. He recognized the beggar as his own disowned self, as the discarded child whose softness had been declared unmanly, whose tears had been declared weakness, whose need had been declared shameful. And he began, slowly, painfully, to take that child back into himself. This is what watching alone could not have done. Watching produces a relationship between observer and observed, in which the observed remains other. It does not deliver its information. It does not yield its energy. It does not become me. The shadow figure, watched with detachment, remains autonomous. He returns. The compulsion returns. The projection returns. Because the work of integration has not been performed. Only the symptom has been quieted. And note carefully what active imagination is not. It is not visualization in the modern sense, an exercise in deliberately constructing pleasant images. It is not fantasy in the colloquial sense, a daydream the ego entertains itself with. It is the deliberate suspension of the ego's grip on the image-making faculty, so that the unconscious may produce images of its own. Images that have the autonomy, the surprise, the genuine otherness of a person met for the first time. The figures that emerge in such a state are not invented, they are encountered. And like any genuine encounter, they demand something of the one who meets them. How does one know whether one is genuinely confronting or merely imagining? The figures one is genuinely confronting say things one does not want to hear. They refuse the ego's preferred outcome. They have their own agenda. If your inner figures only confirm what you already believe, only flatter your self-image, only deliver the resolution you were hoping for, you are not yet in active imagination. You are still in the ego's puppet theater. The genuine encounter has the unmistakable quality of meeting someone. The small shock of recognition that arrives when another consciousness, even a partial one, addresses you across the threshold of the unconscious. And when the encounter is genuine, life itself begins to change. The patient I described, within a year, his marriage altered. He found that he could weep with his wife. He found that he could be tired and admit it. He found that his rage at incompetent junior colleagues had drained away, because the figure he had been raging at, the part of himself that did not know, that had failed, that needed help, was no longer being projected outward. The beggar had come inside. The gate stood empty, and the man who had taken him in was, by any measure that mattered, more himself than he had ever been.
Then how does one carry both?
In concluding our exploration of watching versus confronting, I find myself appreciating what Tolle's practice offers, while also recognizing its limitations. The practice of watching the thinker provides genuine relief from the exhausting identification with compulsive thinking. It offers a taste of freedom, a recognition of oneself as awareness rather than as thoughts and emotions. For those trapped in mental suffering, This practice can be genuinely liberating. It creates the space, the breathing room, the detachment that makes life bearable when the mind has become a prison. However, from the perspective of individuation, watching alone is incomplete. True psychological wholeness requires not just observing unconscious contents from a safe distance, but actively engaging with them, understanding their meaning, integrating their wisdom and energy. The shadow must not merely be watched as it appears and disappears. It must be confronted, questioned, understood, and integrated. The anima or animus must not merely be observed as it influences our emotions and projections. It must be engaged in dialogue, differentiated, and assimilated. Perhaps the complete path requires both the witness and the warrior, both the capacity to observe without being overwhelmed and the courage to engage without being destroyed. Tolle's witnessing creates the stable platform from which confrontation becomes possible. My confrontation gives purpose and direction to the witnessing, ensuring it leads to integration rather than merely detachment. May you have the wisdom to know when to watch and when to engage, when to step back in witnessing awareness, and when to step forward in confrontation. May you develop both the witness who observes with calm presence and the warrior who courageously confronts what must be faced. For the psyche is not merely to be watched like passing clouds, it is also to be engaged like a worthy opponent, dialogued with like a mysterious teacher, integrated like a long-lost part of oneself. We are both audience and actor, both witness and participant. To be only the witness is to miss half the play. To be only the actor is to be swept away by the drama. But to be both, this is the complete human experience. Watch, yes, but also engage. Observe, yes, but also confront. Distance yourself, yes, but also allow yourself to be touched, moved, transformed by what you encounter in the depths. This is the path to wholeness.
Become who you truly are.